Hello and welcome to another episode of Fan the Flames Live. Today I am excited to be talking with Sarah Longfield. I think Sarah and I have a lot of those kind of interconnections, those kind of overlapping spaces with art and theatre and kind of facilitation and all of that sort of work. So I'm really sort of interested to see what's our conversation going to be about and how we explore this idea that everybody has a flame and how can we nurture that flame, fan that flame, both our own flames but also the flames of others through the work that we do. So let me allow Sarah to first of all introduce herself. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Robert. I'm very happy to be here. So, yes, I'm based in Glasgow. I know I don't sound like it, but I've been here 22 years and I'm a creative business and life coach. And prior to that, originally I started in theatre and I've worked a lot in participatory arts, encouraging
Mm.
people to be more creative in their everyday lives in various different ways.
So when you started off in theatre, what was it that you were doing in that space?
Well, if you'd asked me when I was 16, what's the goal, it would have been the first female artistic director of the National Theatre. Just, yeah,
Ah.
I was going to do that. And then I realized at university that to get that job, I had to be quite serious about scripted drama, and I wasn't. And around a similar time, a new professor arrived at the university, a guy called Baz Kershaw, who was all about performance out with traditional theatre settings, where theatre occurs in community settings, in
Mm.
ritual, in carnival, in festivals. And I really took to that. And I realized that where my passion lied was, in terms of theatre, was working with people who weren't professional performers, who were young people, older people, people from all walks of life, who could get a greater meaning about the world and life and their place in it through making theatre. So that's what
Mm.
fired me up.
Wow. So this just throws me back to the work I did with the London Bubble, where we talked about Augustus Boal and Forum Theatre and taking theatre into communities and creating theatre with communities, because there was something just magical about how they were able to access the narrative or retell their own narratives through theatre, but in a very raw way that
Mm-hmm.
just kind of really tapped into what was happening for them and for their communities.
Yeah. And I think that's using kind of a creative process. It doesn't necessarily have to be theatre, but theatre's perhaps the one that it needs the least amount of kit. Like when I do projects where you'd have a visual arts person and you'd have a
Mm,
dance person and a theatre person, and I'd be the theatre person. I'd rock up with just me. Maybe I might have a stereo, little CD player. That's dating me slightly, but in essence, you can make theatre with absolutely nothing. It's that storytelling thing, isn't it? It's gathering
yeah.
around the fire at the end of the day and sharing stories
Mm,
and giving a platform. It doesn't necessarily need to be that fancy stage with the proscenium arch. It can be, just an area on a bit of ground where someone can share their story and you elevate it slightly. You make it that little bit more magical. You make this live moment powerful
mm.
just by turning it up a notch, and then they have authority to share their opinion, and there's something so wonderful about that. I've worked a lot with young people whose voices are constantly trampled on and ignored, and I ran a young people's theatre company in Glasgow for 12 years. I was the artistic director there, and to give those young people the power to know that their voice meant something, that their
Yeah.
opinion mattered, was um, it was incredibly rewarding work to be able to help enable that to happen, empower that to happen.
And one of the things that I found when working with young people with theatre was that once they realized that you were serious about giving them a voice, then they became serious about what they wanted to share. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just the, you know, we don't get to do what we want to do in life kind of stories, that it became these real in-depth, complex narratives that they wanted to share about their experience of the world. And all of a sudden you went, okay, yeah, they're young people, they know so much, there's so much richness here to be shared and for others to hear and listen to and take part in.
Yeah. And also, I think a lot of the young people I worked with were growing up in poverty, and there was various, complications and things that meant that quite a few of them, their backgrounds were chaotic.
Mm,
So a lot of the work that we made wasn't directly autobiographical, but was also about escape.
yeah,
Being able to go away to your theatre club on a Wednesday night, you could escape. You could
yeah,
imagine possible worlds and try on different hats.
yeah,
You know, and I
yeah.
suppose that's for me. That's the connection with coaching. I'm working with someone. Sorry to and let's bring it back to coaching, but I can get very enthusiastic about this because it's in a very intimate, like one-to-one theatre setting almost,
Mm,
where you're creating a space for people to try on different hats
yep.
and try different possible futures. And so I can see an absolute through line with all my work in what I'm doing is I'm just doing it in different ways.
Absolutely. I remember when I first came into coaching and sitting in a room where somebody was talking about open questions and saying, asking you what, when, why, who, not, well, they didn't say why, but who, what if questions. And I was like, wait a minute, these are the questions that I ask myself when playing a character of the character I'm playing. And that, I think, has stayed with me and it kind of forms my coaching now in terms of that narrative space of, well, who are we being? What's the character that we're playing in this performance called life? And how do we want to shift that? So what different stories do we want to tell, or what different characteristics do we want to embody in order to tell a different story, or to go down a different path, or create a new scene to our story, as it were, a new chapter.
Yeah. And there's I might be getting a little, stop me if I'm getting too theatre technical there, but like in narrative coaching, there's a lot of Stanislavski. It's the method, it's the system. What
Mm,
was happening to your character the minute before that event? What happens afterwards? How do the other characters interact? And for me, interestingly, when I made theatre, I hated that. I hated the method acting thing. It was like, get over yourself, and just play a role. But in coaching, I find that fascinating because it's real life.
yes.
We're not pretend.
Yeah.
We don't have to, have a complete breakdown on stage when, in a Daniel Day-Lewis style. But that, yeah, it's made me make peace. It's like a little sort of full circle from
Mm,
theatre studies A level, where I'm like, actually, there's some validity in Stanislavski's stuff here. I'm willing
yeah.
to take that on.
And because I remember when I was talking about theatre and coaching and saying, so this is, where I see therapy existing as well. And this idea, or we're breaking down what makes up this character. And when this character isn't functioning in a way that it desires to, well, what do we need to go back and have a look at and explore? Why did that character do that? What was going on there? How can we make sense of that so that the character in the now can come to peace with that, to create change and shift as they move forward? Not that I do therapy, but my sense of
Mm,
that therapeutic way of working really kind of sits with this thing of, well, let's unpick these characters, let's unpick this
mm,
narrative and see where it takes us. Because I think that, unknown to me when I was first working with young people in theatre, that what I was doing was coaching,
mhm,
and we were also coaching through metaphor, because we were looking at this story and going, so what do we want to change in this story? What would make this character's life better? and that
Hmm.
was resonating back to them about, well, what do they want to change in their lives.
Hmm.
And so there was all these kind of interactions taking place. Well, I was just going, we're making a show.
Yeah.
But actually, there was so much more taking place. And now I look back at it and go, wow, that's why when we work with drama, we have such impacts, because there is so much happening in that space that goes beyond just making a show.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's so interesting. I don't know. Yeah, for me, it was about, yeah, working with people where it wasn't about them making a living, making that show, as
Mm,
working with professional actors. It was a it was an addition to somebody's life. It was some way of enhancing
yeah.
what they do, which it made it so rewarding. But yeah, I think that there's something really interesting that I was working with a client very recently who's got a difficulty with their boss, and they're just not meeting. And actually, where my client was going was that realization that it kind of didn't matter what the boss was doing, it was their reaction to it.
Mm,
And that's where those kind of storytelling comes in. And it's so, and that's, on it can be on a surface level, not necessarily on a deeply therapeutic level of, I'm just going to change how I respond to this.
yeah. And it changes everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're working in your in your mini theater, because now this reminds me of, I'm bouncing around all over the place. Now this reminds me of, there was a company called Smallest Theatre in the World. They were based out in Deptford. I don't think they're there now. And they basically had a motorcycle with a sidecar. And the
Hmm.
sidecar they built into a theatre that housed one, maximum two people.
Yeah.
And you had a little uh, uh, performance space that you could see. You'd sit in the sidecar and they'd perform to you, but they were also performing to the audience that were
Hmm.
watching. So it became very meta in its
Yeah.
way of working. And when you said to me about, that this new kind of creating theatre, I don't think you said creating theatre, but when you're working one to one with somebody, you're in a new kind of theatre space ish, and how that is also this kind of meta space, because you're working here with this person, looking at, so what's happening here in this relationship with what this person is bringing, but then how is
Yeah.
that impacting the world outside, and how is the world outside impacting this space?
Mm. I think I think a lot about temporary autonomous zones with
Oh,
this.
tell me more about
You
that.
know, like the Burning Man festival is probably your ultimate TAS, your temporary autonomous zone, where it's from nothing, something happens and then it disappears. And
Yes.
within that space, different things can happen. You can challenge the status quo, you can move out of normal behaviors. And yeah, with my theatre stuff, we were very keen. There was no theatres in the area of Glasgow where we were working. And so we built theatres. And it was that same thing. It was like the circus coming to town and then overnight the circus
Mm,
disappears. It was creating that space that had no preconceived rules, or it wasn't necessarily anyone's territory. How can you create a
mm,
space that's got that kind of neutrality to it, and also this temporariness where magic can happen? And I know that's a bit flowery, arty language, but I do apply that. And I think when I'm doing my best job as a coach is where I can subtly, I'm not bringing out the glitter curtain, although some of my clients would bloody love that. Um, but I've got the color coded bookshelf is subtle, but
mm.
there enough. There's a bit of spectacle. But yeah, it's creating that space. It is just turning it up a notch. And I say that when I'm teaching facilitation, and how do you facilitate? You turn yourself up a bit.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter whether you're an enthusiastic sort of bunny like I am, or whether you're quite a chilled Zen facilitator. You do need to bring a heightened version of yourself
Yeah.
into the space. And I think that's the same in coaching, and it's tiny, but it makes such a difference in creating this temporary space, autonomous space for your client.
And there's something that I hadn't seen before where it's temporary. And I'd never, it's so obvious, but I'd never really made that association to this idea that what happens in that moment, that hour, let's say, of coaching, that's it. Once it's happened, it's happened.
That's it.
And we
Yeah.
might return to the themes, but it's gone. It's and it reminds me of, when London Bubble used to do promenade theatre, and you'd arrive in a park, integrate the set into the park, do the show, and then it would disappear.
Yeah.
And if you came back a week later, there was no evidence that this thing existed, but there was a reverberation in the system of it.
Yeah.
And it's like our conversations with coachees, thinking partners, clients, whatever we want to call them, have this reverberation in their system. But
Hmm.
if you look, it's like, well, there's nothing there to go. It came from there. Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's
And
got
there's
me
something
really
really
thinking.
that's really magic about that. And also on Zoom, because I only coach online, there's an absolute artifice in what we're doing. To the point
Hmm.
we were discussing this earlier, Zoom flips your image. So you see what you see in the mirror. You're not seeing the real
Yeah,
you. Um, so you're already in, this artificial bubble, but not necessarily artificial in a negative sense,
yeah, yeah.
because it's that ephemeral place where you can try stuff out and it doesn't matter if it doesn't work because it's a moment.
And it's that, because this also is reminding me of mask work, where you put on a mask and you're not you, so you're
Yeah,
afforded other behaviors
yeah,
because you're not you. And when you take it off, you go back to being you, which also reminds me of Brené Brown's work around, what's the armor that we're wearing? And how do we strip ourselves of that armor so the true us can exist in the space? And it's like, how can you try on different masks until you actually go, wait, this feels like a mask, but actually it's me, and the mask is allowing me to exist in the space. Oh, I feel like half the people listening or watching are going, what are they talking about?
yeah. Maybe there'll be a few theatre people kind of going, "We're with
But I,
you." Yeah,
but I think people get the idea that we wear masks and we wear different versions of ourselves to fit into spaces. And I think there is something very magical about this idea of there are these spaces that exist only in that time, and in that space and in that time we can let go, because I think that's the other thing
hmm,
that a coaching space enables is I don't need to show up here going, hey, I'm great and aren't I wonderful. It's like I can just show up and go, ugh, this is
yeah,
what's going on for me. Hmm.
yeah, yeah. It's playing. I suppose I use playfulness a lot, but playing with creating that space. So yeah, you can just strip it all bare and be you. So you can untangle the stuff
Hmm.
because it's. I suppose I speak in metaphor constantly, and now. I mean, this isn't even a metaphor. I've just got this sort of image. I always talk about a ball of wool being quite tangled. That works for me, um, certainly when I'm working with my coach, I have this ball of wool and I'm kind of untangling each bit and unthreading, and then it
Hmm.
slowly becomes back to being a nice, neat ball of wool. But it sits in my chest, and that's really hard to get to if you've got your
Hmm.
breastplate on and your chainmail and everything.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going with that. That's that's the image. I've
But
lost more
I,
people now.
I love the image of that though, because there's something there for me around what is that sacred part of ourselves that so this is, I think, part of what where I get this calling to create Fan the Flames from, Because it's asking that question of what is that piece of us that is hidden behind all of these layers that holds a greatness to it, holds a potential to it, but we hide it away. And how can somebody allow us the time, the space to show it the light, or give it the energy, or give it the attention that it needs to flicker into something more?
Hmm.
And when you talked about, the wall being behind all of these layers, it's like, how do we remove those layers so we can actually take that ball of wool and go, well, here's the wall. What does the wall want to be? What is possible for
Hmm.
this? So we can enable that to happen. And maybe we need to put it back and bring it out again, and put it back and bring it out again. And over time, we then go,
Yeah.
right, now it's free. But if we never get the opportunity to look at the wall, if we never get the opportunity to pay attention to that inner part of ourselves, then we never get to be that roaring fire. We dim our light.
And it comes down to creativity,
Mm,
a word that divides people, because some people are quite happily labeled as creative and others less so. But, creativity in its broader sense is about using your imagination, solving problems, imagining possible other futures.
mm,
It's that process that takes bravery. It is about looking at the wall and going, what really is this? What can
yeah.
it be? I think maybe, oh, this is interesting. I think maybe I do enjoy coaching creatives hugely, and that's probably most of my clients are creatives because of my experience in the sector. And I think even though coaching's non-directive,
Mm,
it's still, yeah, people like working with a coach who get it. Um, but I think there's something interesting there because they already do that bravery. And actually,
mm,
it's not necessarily the creative act that's the problem. It sometimes is, sometimes there's a block in terms of actually getting that thing made in whatever form that thing is. Maybe it's a book, maybe it's a pot, maybe it's a painting, a dance. But most of the time, it's not the actual making because they've already made peace with that, and they're quite, they've had lots of years of practice of being vulnerable in that way. It's more around the other stuff, like how do I market myself as a business?
mm.
How do I actually make money from this? How do the kind of how do I fit in what feels like a very regimented world when I want to be,
Yeah,
flinging my
yeah.
ball everywhere? But that's really interesting because they've already got this bravery there on the
Yeah.
surface. Yeah, that fires me up.
And there's this kind of different bravery that's necessary to face the world. So there's, I look at performers and I go, they stand on stage in front of all of these people. Wow, that there's a bravery to this. And then there's a different vulnerability of going, well, how do I market myself? How do I tell others about me so that they'll promote me, that they'll put me on, that they'll agree to take me on into that piece of work? Or how do I fit into a world where I don't? Yet that paradox. How do I fit into a world where I don't fit and I don't want to fit, but I need to fit on some level in order to exist in this world?
Yeah, and and then there's a perception thing there, isn't there, about what are you perceiving you need to fit into?
Hmm. Which I think for both creatives and those that deem themselves as non-creative, that's one of the big questions, isn't it? There is a world that exists and you think you need to fit into it. So what is the thing that you think you need to fit
Hmm.
into? What is the
Yeah,
thing you
and
think you should be doing?
is that a truth that's working for you, or can you just reinvent the truth in that?
Yeah.
Which goes back to that perspective thing, isn't it? How
Yeah.
does this character react to this thing?
Yeah. And which characters see it and which don't, and which are in the space when it's happening and which are not.
Hmm.
what is it? What's the Shakespeare with Bottom, where they all go into the woods and have
Midsummer
weird
Night's
dream,
Dream.
Midsummer Night's Dream, where they all have dreams and different perceptions of their relationships with each other and how they get tangled and untangled. And there's something I don't know where I'm going with that, but there's something interesting about the entanglement of relationships that we have and the perceptions that we have of relationships, and how both theatre and coaching shine lights on that to go, is that true?
Mm-hmm. Or what are the truths here? Because,
Yeah,
everyone's bringing their own paradigm and their own
yeah,
truth,
yeah.
which I think is just hugely helpful. That's why, I feel coaching so rewarding, and I love being coached. Just digging into that, taking a
Mm.
moment without it getting too woo woo, or I avoided like self-help stuff for years, and to my own personal development detriment, I think, because I was so like, that's too hippie,
Mm.
which is maybe ironic because, as my mum said, but you're the hippiest person I know. I'm like, I'm not. Perception, right? I feel the story I tell myself is that I'm a very organized, pragmatic person. I just happen to work in theatre.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love that. I love these. I love those perception ripples where somebody goes, you're the hippie. You're the absolute hippie." And you go, "No, I'm not. They're the hippie." And it's like, well, that's interesting. We're just kind of passing this down the line. And there's something interesting about when we embrace it and go, "Yeah, I am a hippie. I'm just a raving hippie. That's what it is." But they're more raving hippie than me, because I know that I do that. I do this thing of, I go, yeah, I like my crystals and I like my bees and I like to meditate, but I'm not really like that.
No, you're not
Uh,
that. You're not woo woo, are you,
and I
Robert?
go, well, actually, I'm completely that. That's what I am. And my family look at me and they're just like, we don't even know what planet you're on.
Yeah. Well, I can empathize there.
And I'm like, no, I'm grounded. It's all about being here and now and in the moment. And then I hear my language and go, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I can see where they're coming from. Especially if I
Yeah.
look at my 16-year-old self and where he came from and how he would look at me and go, that guy's just, what's he on?
Yeah. My 16-year-old self will be like, well done. That's great. But it's maybe taken a few evolutions to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think mine would be very, I mean, that's an interesting question there, isn't it? And we often use that in coaching, what would your past self, what would your younger self think of you
Hmm.
now? And, if your older self was to give your younger self advice, what would that advice be? And that sort of thing. And think, yeah, my younger self would be going, I can't believe you bloody did that. I can't believe that you got away with it almost. How are you doing that? How did that happen? Yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it? I'm actually in my last session with my own coach, who also has a theatre background, drawn towards them. We were exploring. I forget. There is one of the main kind of basic coaching books that's got this exercise in, and I've not even read it, but I like the exercise. So the idea that you've got these different sides to yourself, these different roles that you have to play, that kind of create these characters. And so I was kind of really working in on defining these different characters and how sometimes they don't get on.
Mm.
Like there's, for me, there's what I call the nuanced adult, which is what I try and be professionally. In fact, that's kind of like an aim across the board. I want to be a nuanced adult. But then there's also the playful joker who wants to tickle people with a feather duster
Mm.
and create a little bit, nothing too anarchic. Don't want to bring down all the systems, but just challenge things and kind of go, well, I know that's how it's supposed to be, but I don't really want to do it that way. Bit pirate in a good sense.
Hmm.
And then there's the rock. I'm a single mum who's been self-employed for the majority of my career. And when I wasn't self-employed, when I was running the theatre company, we never really knew where our funding was coming from 6 months to 6 months. So it's always been, I've always been in a risky financial situation. It's always worked out. But I think then there's become the story of this rock.
Mm.
I'm the one that everyone can rely on. Yeah, that's not the best role to play constantly for yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
But the interesting thing for me is, how do these characters intersect? There's another one. I'm not gonna expose that one. It's the one I like the least. But
Oh God, I'm so curious now, but I'll accept.
I'll give you. It's the very judgmental one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm even blushing at the thought
A little
of
bit.
exposing that now. Yeah, but yeah, where these characters intersect, where like, as I'm sure you work with your clients, inner critics are useful. They stop you jumping off the cliff, right? It's really useful. But to identify these as critics or enablers or cheerleaders of different aspects of your life, and the responsibilities that you have and everything, is so useful, because then I'm like, oh, that's that rearing up. And actually, let's just go back to nuanced adult.
Yeah,
It's kind of my own
yeah,
little mini transactional analysis in my head,
yeah.
but with characters.
Because it reminds me of the work of Nishi Patel, where she talks about, I can't remember exactly if she calls them inner selves or not, but this idea that we have a group of characters that exist, or a group of roles that we play out in the world, and they can be in conflict with each other because they want and need different things, but they can also sit and have conversations with each other to decide, well, who needs to be at the front now? Which part of us needs to step up to do this piece of work, or to manage this situation, whether it's a family dynamic, or in the office, whatever that might be. So there's this, like, how do we agree how we're working together, so that then there is this healthy dynamic. And then she talks about this idea that there might be this rogue one that you don't notice, that's kind of weaving in and out and causing trouble and chaos. And I think part of what happens to us as humans is we don't recognize that we're playing different roles or different aspects of ourselves. So when we are in conflict or challenge, or we're in a space of inability to achieve or do, we don't go, wait a minute, which me is this that's stopping me, or
Yeah,
that's in the way here, and which me do I need to bring forth to make this happen?
yeah, and that's fascinating, right?
Mm. Mm. Because it's
Yeah,
almost like we're all of the characters in the play.
yeah.
But
Oh, the Pirandello. There's 7 characters in search of an author.
ooh,
Mm.
so that reminds me of oh, what's it called? I'm not in the room with the bookshelf. I'm looking like it's there, but it's not there.
Let's
There's a book.
pretend it's there. It's fine. It's there.
There it is. Right, so there's a book called, I think it's called The Seven Plots, which talks about this idea that there are only seven
Yeah,
stories, but they are just told in different orders. So we think there are all of these stories, but actually, when you break it down, there are just seven. It's a bit like
yeah,
Joseph Campbell's idea about the monomyth. This hero's journey exists in multiple cultures, but it's one story. But we will attach a meaning to this single story that exists in all the cultures.
yeah.
So go back. You said a phrase there about the seven. No, the
Is it
seven
7
characters.
characters in search of an author, or in search of a playwright? It's the Pirandello play. I read it years ago,
I don't know
but I
if I
love
know.
that concept. It's these 7 characters who find themselves in the theatre and they haven't got anyone to write them.
That's
Good one.
interesting.
Yeah,
Because that then calls forth that notion as, the lives that we are living. If we live in my paradigm of this is all a story that is being told, and we can give power of the writing out to others to create our narratives, or we can take the pen ourselves and we can go, no, I'm going to decide what my story is. we can be in a state where we go, well, there's nobody to write my story. What do I do? How do I show
Mhm.
up? How do I behave? And I guess that can be that sense of lostness that we can sometimes have. Where it's like, well, I don't have the pen. Nobody's got the pen. The pen's just floating in the ether somewhere.
Yeah. And you know, it shows up in the littlest things. It doesn't need to be big life stuff. You know, like if I've gone for a freelance contract for something and didn't get it, I feel like that pen's been taken away from me. You know, I feel like I've
Mm,
been waiting for the email to ping. And I find myself doing like not doing the work I should be doing, not doing the important stuff. I then find myself like, you know, looking at kind of various job listing things just to see if there's any other freelance things I should, you know, chase
mm,
after, because it's that idea that somebody else has got the pen and I need to find the person who's got the pen.
yeah.
When actually you bring it back in and go, no, what I need to do is the important bits of work that are sitting right in front of me.
So I was listening to that and thinking, what have we been talking about for the last
Yeah,
half
we've
an
gone,
hour?
Robert, it's gone round a bit, hasn't it?
I mean, I've loved it. Don't get me wrong. I've
Yeah, me
absolutely loved
too.
it. And I just was like, you know, has it been a journey of who are we in the world and where do we where do we take our power from? Is it from ourselves holding the pen? Is it from the world with the pen writing our own story? And something about who the characters that we play, but also the kind of the theaters that we play these stories in and the environments that exist within that. Yeah.
Food for thought, which I
Mm.
suppose, you know, sometimes when I feel my chips are down, I'll berate myself for not, you know, coming on something like this and going, "Oh, right, here's my acronym. Here's my beautifully polished model of how we should do stuff." But that's not how I work. You know, what how
Mm.
I work is exploring these fascinating things about how we make sense of the world and what's the
Yeah.
meaning, what's the point, and going on these adventures. It's much more interesting for me, anyway.
Because I think the adventures, because you know, there's an excitement and a spark about going on in the adventure that makes me want to go on more adventures as opposed to going, oh, that's the just the tool that I use, right? I'll use that then, and then it's like the adventure's over.
Yeah.
Whereas this makes me think about, well, where's the next play going to begin, and where's the next pop-up show going to happen in my life and in my world, and what's that going to be about, and what part am I going to play in that story? Am I just going to be a supporting character? Or am I going to be a lead? And all of that's kind of running around
Mm.
my head.
Oh, we'll get onto status games in a minute. Maybe.
I think we need to save status games for the next one.
Yeah. Could we just do a whole conversation about status? That's fascinating.
I think we should. I think we should. I used to do that for the when I did some work with the NHS and we were working on what was it called? Compassionate. It wasn't called compassionate behavior. Compassionate leadership. We used to go in and play status games. So we used to have a mixture of teams, and then we'd give them different statuses to play and
Mm.
see how they manage that. And you'd have people going, "This isn't my status." Well, yeah, no, but it's a game. But I'm not a two. I'm at the top. It's like, but it's just a game. Just noticing how they couldn't hand over status or control to others. And we're going, but this is part of
Mm.
this is where the problem sits. That person knows more than you in that situation, but you're not allowing them to own it and to have it. But that's a whole nother story.
It really is. I think that's the biggest skill, though, if you can, if as a facilitator, not as coach, but as facilitator, if you can support someone to be able to have happy high status, you
Mm,
know, that friendly, I can laugh at myself high status and walk into any room with that, you know, like the Obamas, they're the kind of top happy high
yeah,
status, you know, then the game's won, right?
yeah. And what's interesting, most of That's a huge generalization. Some of the clients that I work with, part of their challenges is that they're working with unhappy high status. And
Because, yeah, with the status comes anxiety.
yeah, yeah. Or they're
And we
trying to
get,
navigate the status of others in the work they do.
yeah.
Whoa, that's a whole nother one we could delve into. So Sarah, I'm gonna have you back, and we're just gonna have to. I don't know what would be. It's like our sessions would have a theme or a tagline. I don't know what that would be, but it feels like a
Yeah, it's like where theatre meets coaching.
yeah.
I want it graphic. Sparkly lights, lights around the mirror, bit of glitter. There we go.
And go.
But we're not too far out there. We're not too arty. We're quite grounded, normal people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Whatever that means. So, where where can people find you? So they've listened to this, watched this, and they've gone, "I want to work with Sarah." Where do they find you?
Just saralongfield.co.uk. That's my website, and everything's on there. You know, everything's on there. All the different
Brilliant.
ways people can work with me.
Oh,
I've
that's
very
great.
intentionally made it all in one place, and there's other bits coming in too, actually, that have been other companies, other social enterprises I've run. It's all coming under one roof. So
Nice.
saralongfield.co.uk, and they can chat to me there. LinkedIn, Instagram. Yeah.
Awesome. Brilliant. So Sarah, I've loved this, and I can't wait till we do this again. So we'll get something in the diary and swing back round for more of our arty glitterball conversations.
That's the title. Brilliant. Thank you,
Awesome.
Robert. I've really enjoyed it too.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.